Welcome to the show today. Just a trigger warning about things that we are going to cover. We are going to be covering the death of loved ones, miscarriages, rape and sexual assault of a child, witnessing domestic violence, complex trauma, and an alcoholic parent. So wanted to make sure that you knew what we're covering in the show today, so that if that's something that you were interested in skipping or not skipping, that you at least knew ahead of time. So enjoy the show. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanok, session number 746. I'm Joe Sanok, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast. This summer, we've been doing a series all about how I got through it, or how I'm getting through it would probably be more accurate, because whether it's trauma or tough things in our lives, oftentimes it's not just, a neat package that we wrap up in a bow and, send away. It's often, it goes through waves, and, we know that as therapists. And so just interviewing people all about what they've been through. And if you missed my telling my story, episode 736, that aired in late June of 2022. Latoya Smith interviewed me talking about my uncoupling and becoming an unexpected single dad. And really this series comes out of just wanting to hear other people's stories and knowing how they got through it, building my own skill set and having you come along for the ride. And so, today I am so excited. I have Sonia Trefflich with me today, and Sonia's going to share with us all sorts of different stories from her life, and then also how she got through it. So Sonia, welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast.
Thank you so much, Joe.
Yeah, well, tell us a little bit about yourself professionally and personally. What's your life look like?
So I am a mental health therapist. I have an office here in Las Vegas, and I'm also licensed in California and Texas, where I do therapy via telehealth or video. Let me backtrack. I'm a trauma therapist, and so this topic is very close to my heart. I work with survivors of child abuse and neglect, primarily women, but I do have some lovely men that I work with as well. I am in a single practice, and I'm hoping this year to bring on an intern. So I'm excited to expand, and that's in the works. Personally, I'm a military spouse. My husband is in the Air Force, active duty, and I have 4 wonderful, active, brilliant children that keep me very busy. I have 3 girls and 1 baby boy.
Wow, you are busy.
Yes.
Wow. Well, when we were talking before we got recording about kind of where to start, and this is obviously a conversation I have with everyone before we get going, really for you, your story starts in utero. Tell us what was going on as you were, developing inside your mom.
So I grew up in a little beach town on the west coast of Guatemala. And at the time when I was born, my parents were early teens to early adults. So they were around 19 years old when my mom was pregnant with me. And, first of all, it was an arranged marriage. So none of them really wanted to get married to each other. And so already that started a very conflicting marriage. And so when I was born in utero, my father developed alcoholism. And, my mother's also a survivor of severe child abuse and neglect. And you put those 2 combinations together, it's never a good thing. And so my father, for several reasons, he felt like it was appropriate to, blame my mother, and was extremely physically and verbally aggressive from the moment I was in utero.
Mm. And you said some things happened, when you were a toddler. Share with us what your toddler years were like.
So my experience is a little similar to the immigrant experience. In the home where my parents and I were trying to be raised, it was actually my grandmother's home and my grandfather's home. And it was a packed house. And my mom realized her father had actually given her this advice decades before to immigrate to the US because he didn't know, he had never been here, but in his mind, we would have a better life. She would have a better life. And so she decided that would become her goal. And so then I was left to be cared for in this home where my father was around. He was not my primary caregiver. So my mother immigrated when I was 2 years old. And we, at the time we had people that were around to help, nannies, but, I was neglected. And I mean, there's even a joke that I would walk to the beach as a toddler and, somehow that happened and nobody was really looking out for me because we lived so close to the beach I could walk there. So during that environment, I was, there was a lot of alcohol. There were a lot of parties, a lot of alcohol going on, and I was sexually assaulted by several different adults, starting at around age 3. And that continued throughout my teen years, but specifically during my toddler years, my formative years, that happened as well. So, yeah.
Man, I want to jump right to the how we got through it or how you got through it kind of part. But I mean, obviously we want to hear your whole story first, but dang, I'm so sorry. I mean, there's just not even words, for that sort of abuse and that sort of experience. When did you move to the United States?
So my mom, did the best she could to, she would send money. And at some point, my grandmother, her mother, she was a go-getter and she offered to bring me to the US. And so to this day, I actually remember that night, even though I was around 4.5, almost 5. As I mentioned, I'm from Guatemala, so the water isn't all that sanitized. And just the night before, I actually, had parasites. And I remember that moment where, they picked me up really early in the morning, maybe 3 in the morning. And I, still had the struggle medically, issue with my stomach and the parasites. And it sounds so graphic, but I remember I literally threw up and my grandmother took me and I remember getting into the bus and we did the trip from Guatemala to the US and we crossed the border. And so that happened around May, June. And then I started kindergarten in August. And then I was reunited with my mother in Los Angeles, California.
Wow. So then, you had told me before we got going, and also on your your application that you got pregnant at some point. How old were you when you got pregnant?
I was around 23, 24, around there.
Mm-hmm.
The first pregnancy I had.
Yeah. And tell us about the first pregnancy, and I think also you said the second pregnancy before we got recording. What happened?
So the first pregnancy I had, I was really excited, and I actually suffered a miscarriage. And so that was extremely difficult because this whole time when I got married to my spouse, given my history, I really just wanted to create my own family. And I wanted to, in some ways, make things right. And to suffer a loss, that was very difficult. And so then I had my daughter, my rainbow baby after that. And I had my second child and everything was going well. And I was pregnant again and I lost that baby as well.
It's just like loss after loss for you. I mean, I can't, it's just when we were talking about this episode. It was, do we cover all of it, or do we just kind of drill into one of the things? And I think you had mentioned that as a trauma therapist, the idea of kind of shedding light on things, telling the stories, revealing it all so that we understand the whole context. But I mean, to be in your early 20s and to have been through all that and then suffer 2 miscarriages just feels so unfair. And just, I mean, to have so many things hit somebody at such a young age. I mean, at that point, how did you even conceptualize all that had happened to you at that point? Because I feel like a lot of the clients that I worked with, especially, foster kids, for example, that had been through severe abuse and trauma, oftentimes dissociated, made very poor choices, were like just trying to escape through drugs and alcohol. How did you even get through that up to that point with so much trauma and change that you had had?
Now, I was thinking about that. I got up early and I did a bit of a run on my treadmill, and I thought, okay, what am I going to tell him? And I've been thinking about that throughout the week. And the first thing that I thought about was grit. I've always had grit in my life. I have this passion and perseverance to somehow endure for a long-term goal. And my long-term goal was actually to be where I am today. To have my family, to have my children, and to turn back, all of what was handed to me by life, by people, and show people that they're going to get through it, to help people heal. I remember I've always had this intuition and just observation of people. I think I was a little therapist before I knew it. Because I was also bullied throughout my elementary school years. And I remember little me thinking like, wow, like this is inappropriate. Like this behavior my parents or these people are displaying, that's not healthy. That's not okay. So the ability to be able to, stand up for what's right, even if it's just inside of us, right? Because I would never be able to just, come up to my parents and say like, your behavior is inappropriate. But in my mind, I knew better. Like, you know what? Like, there's more to life than this. I've had that hope, the faith. God was extremely important to me, even though I wasn't really religious growing up. I knew he existed, and I knew that somehow, some way, with this grit that I had and this goal that I had to be free of the dysfunction and of the abuse, that he would make it happen somehow, some way, and that I would be where I am today.
Now, how old were you when you set that goal of, wanting a family, wanting to be healthy, wanting to have a career that you helped people? Like, how early was that seed planted inside of you, would you say?
Honestly, I would say around kindergarten to first grade. I think I was fairly young. I don't understand how that could happen now looking back, but it definitely was around. And I think a lot of it had to do with education. I would get grounded, and part of my grounding would be to go read books, which I have to very much thank my mom for. And so I became very much interested in how other people led their lives, and different cultures, customs, how people do things. And I realized there was another way to do things. And there was, another lifestyle that I could have. And that became part of my goal. I knew that education was the gateway, was that thing that was going to open a lot of doors for me. So I became very much invested in my education and realized that one of the ways that I could get away from it all was through school. So school was a lot of times, even though I was bullied, once I, got to middle school, I wasn't really bullied that much. And I made friends and it was okay. But I realized then that that's what I had to do for myself so that my sacrifice would not be in vain.
If you're like me, not only do you try to optimize your private practice, but I also try to optimize my body with healthy eating, organic food usually. And for me, Also, adding enzymes in as I age is really helpful to help me with my digestion and assimilation of food. That's why my friends over at Bioptimizers, I'm so excited that they've put together an awesome offer for you that's totally free. You're going to get a free bottle of their best-selling enzyme supplement called Masszymes. You also get a copy of their book, Sick to Superhuman, another copy of a book, Ultimate Carnivore Cookbook, and you're going to get a free copy of their plant-based Superfood Delights. I mean, like, this is just a bunch of free stuff that they are sending to you that usually cost $81. Would just love for you to check it out. You just have to pay shipping for this stuff. That's it. And this isn't one of those opt-ins where you then have to give a whole bunch of email information and you get upsold and all those different things. It's genuinely just free stuff from my friends over at Bioptimizers. So if you head on over to Masszymes, that's MassZymes.com/Joe Free. Again, that's Masszymes.com/Joe Free. You know, there's no strings attached here. There's no automatic subscriptions or renewal, so there's nothing to cancel. So just head on over to Masszymes.com/Joe Free to get this totally free bundle. And so the last couple years, you've had even more loss that's hit your family. Tell us what's happened over the last couple years since 2020.
So it just became a little bizarre where the first one to pass away was my mom's uncle's son. So he was my second cousin, which I knew. And whenever we would visit Guatemala after the fact, after I was in the US, he was always the one that we would be around and he would take us places. So I really came to really become really grateful for him. And he ended up passing away first of COVID. And maybe a few weeks later, his father passed away. And then the following year in 2021, another, like a mom and a son again, and then the grandchild. So they were just coming in series. And one of them in particular, the mom that passed away, was as close to a grandmother that I was ever going to have. You know, when you go through the trauma that I've been through, I was surrounded by dysfunction and, I'm just going to say it, a lot of evil. And this individual offered me so much love and compassion that I felt safe with her. And so when she passed, it was extremely hard for me because I could look back on my life and realize sometimes we forget how much people impact us and how these acts of kindness, how they're so important to us, especially to those of us who've gone through a lot of pain and experience a lot of pain in the hands of other people. And so when we encounter kindness, at least for me, I never forgot it.
Wow. I mean, when you have someone that was such a big part of your life, or people that maybe had the potential to change or shift or, to lose so many people in such a short period of time, like, how did you get through that? How did you conceptualize what was happening?
At the time, it was almost like we're all, it sounds terrible, but it happened so much. We were almost just waiting. Who's next? Like, what's going to happen? So we were definitely not even starting our grieving process. And so for me, I realized at the time, I'm a therapist. I know what to do. I know that this is far too much to deal with. So I put myself in therapy and I started working with a therapist to address all of the losses that I've encountered.
Now, when you think about going through therapy and going through kind of some grief counseling or trauma counseling, were there mindsets or habits or things that stood out to you that were more helpful?
I think so. And, just the importance of having my story be heard. As we talked about earlier, it's just having to tell somebody how painful it is to lose these people or process, or, you know, having a listening ear can be so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, my therapist knows that I'm a therapist. And so it just became, you know, very natural and extremely supportive to just have somebody there that could hold that space for me. Because one of the things I realized, you know, through COVID is we're all tired. We were all exhausted and are exhausted of so much change, so much adjustment we've had to go through in different areas of our life, so much loss. And so I felt like I can't really, you know, call a friend up and tell, you know, because they're tired. And so for me, the best option was to really go to a professional, because I've been on the other side. I've been having to, you know, hold space for my clients and how important that is.
Yeah. Now, when you look at your daily life or things you do in your week, I think that sometimes when you have 4 kids or kids at all, and, you know, especially in your situation where, you know, your husband's deployed, active duty, or, you know, going through all that and just life's busy, I think one of the tendencies can be in that busyness to not focus as much on healing, healthy habits, staying grounded. It's just like sometimes you're just in survival mode. And I know that sometimes I get into that as a single dad, and just keeping track of lunches and school things is like enough to drive you crazy. And so I'm wondering for you, what is it that you do to make sure that in a very busy life that you're able to still focus in on your own mental health, your own grounding, your own sense of recovering from some of these things?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I've actually realized in the past around 4 years, since we've had a couple moves, every move for the military and for military families is different, and it comes with its own challenges. You know, at the time, you know, you mentioned deployment. So in the past 4 years, my husband has done different trainings and deployment and trips here and there. And, you know, I've been in survival mode. And so the past end of last year, early this year, I just realized I need to submit. I need to submit, and I need to put myself through the program that I recommend to others, whatever that is. And for me, the program was healing, accepting that it's okay to get help, because, as you said, going through trauma, it's not going to look pretty. It's not going to be this cute little bow. As much as I want it to be this cute little bow, it just doesn't, right? Every loss for some reason may or may not trigger something else in our lives. And especially for those of us who have that complex trauma, it's just a lot. And so for me, I used to think years ago that self-care was great. Like the concept of it, advocated for self-care, until I realized you're terrible at self-care. And so I have made it a point every week. I will disappear at least once a week. And I do other little stuff throughout my week, but every day, every week, one day a week, I go and do something fun, whatever that is. I
What
am
are examples of
intentional.
things that you do for fun during your self-care day or time?
So I love to do a lot of, I'm trying to get back into doing a lot of physical exercise. For me, you know, the movement of the body really, really helps to decrease my stress. And so I've been incorporating a lot of different ways to move my body. And I mean, growing up, we thought this was a luxury, but I'll even do things like do window shopping, or, you know, I will go get a massage, even though I really don't want to. I gently remind myself that self-care is not optional. It is not a luxury. It is not, at this point in my life, I can't afford to not do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that idea of self-care being a privilege versus something we need, like obviously there's people that have jobs or roles that it makes it more difficult, but for us to say, we're raising kids, we have businesses, we have so much on our shoulders, like, are we going to be more effective or less effective if we do some self-care? And I think that's awesome you're doing that. For you, are there certain exercises or things that you do that really light you up?
Absolutely. And I think that was one of the things, music has been one of my lifesavers growing up. It's been where I've been able to escape. I can ignore for that moment, what's happening in my household, when I was growing up, and just escape into this other world of harmonies, of beats, of lyrics. And so for me, a lot of what I do physically actually involves music. So I love actually, one of my favorite things to do is to go for a run, put my headphones on and listen to my favorite gym playlist and don't stop. It does, I do get the runner's high and I love that. And I also love doing yoga, Zumba. I love dancing. Somehow, if I can incorporate that in music, I'm in my happy place.
Yeah. Oh, so one question that I often ask is if you could go back to any age and give your younger self some advice, some tips, what would you go back and kind of say to yourself? And what age would you talk to?
I think I would definitely talk to myself when I had the hardest time, which is probably in elementary school, because I was witnessing a ton of domestic violence at home. And then when I would go to school, I was still learning, English language and the culture. I was trying to assimilate to the American school system and culture. And I had a really hard time. At the time, I was okay with being vulnerable. And then I learned that's not a good idea in the school system. And so I would say, looking back, that was probably the hardest time, one of the hardest times in my life, because I felt so alone. And so if I could go back in that time and give myself advice, I would just say, you're amazing. You're going through a lot. It's going to get better. I promise you. It's going to get better. You can do this.
You're amazing. It's going to get better. That's some dang good advice. Wow. Well, Sonia, thank you so much for telling us how you're getting through it, just the tips and things that are working for you, and just sharing your story with us. We just so appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm really grateful for this opportunity, and hopefully it'll, help somebody else that, life is really hard sometimes, but you will get through it. There is a rainbow on the other side. Just have that grit, stick with it, and ask for help, because we're not supposed to do this on our own.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much.
Wow. This series, it's just amazing, the things that people have been through, the grit that people have, and, the vision from a young age. Even just hearing the last couple episodes before this of, Azizi and Jen, who both lost their parents at age 18 and 21. It's just, just to see how that kind of reshaped the view of life. And even for Sonia just now to talk through going through such tough things, and to have that somehow spur this seed of life can be different, whether that's through education or raising your own family. And it's just amazing to just see the resilience of people, and to not feel like we have to tie it up in a bow. That's been a theme throughout this whole series of folks just saying, yeah, there's times this pops back up, and, there's things that trigger it. And to not feel like we have to have this Joseph Campbell story arc where it lands in a perfect way. That's okay. It's just really, for me, just affirming in regards to my situation, in regards to my learning, my growth, my just the things in my life. And, we couldn't do this show without our sponsors. That's why my friends over at Buy Optimizers, I'm so excited that they've put together an awesome offer for you that's totally free. You're going to get a free bottle of their best-selling enzyme supplement called Mass Zymes. You also get a copy of their book, Sick to Superhuman, another copy of a book, Ultimate Carnivore Cookbook, and you're going to get a free copy of their plant-based Superfood Delights. I mean, like, this is just a bunch of free stuff that they are sending to you that usually cost $81. Would just love for you to check it out. You just have to pay shipping for this stuff. That's it. So just head on over to masszymes.com/JoeFree to get this totally free bundle. Thank you so much for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.